Okay, welcome. This is just a quick tutorial that I'm just going to be doing just to show you how to reduce the noise in a Blender animation. So basically I've done this animation, and if I try to do the render it at a high sort of samples level, then basically it would take like 2 minutes to, or could even be 2 or 3 minutes to render for a frame, which doesn't sound like much. But if you're trying to render, well, actually, no, it can take about 5 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes per frame. When if you're trying to render about 6,000 frames, then that's just going to take way too long, or you're going to need a render farm. So this is just a way of cheating a bit. It only really works in animations because in a still you can see where it's all blurred, but if you're doing an animation, then this is something which would definitely help you. So this is just one of the frames from the scene, and if I do a the rendered view, then you can see that it is very noisy, and I've only set it to like 8 samples. And as you can see in the I'm actually going to be rendering it at 12 samples, and as you can see, it's just dots everywhere, and it's just made up almost of pure noise. And if we do an actual render of it, you can see that this isn't the sort of frame that you'd really want to be using, or sorry, a picture you'd really want to be using in your animation, because obviously if you're going down a tunnel, all you see is dots everywhere. Because the important thing, of course, is that the scene looks smooth. Now, the one thing about when you do use, well, anyway, you'll see anyway. But you can see that with this, so that rendering, yeah, it took just over a minute for a frame. It should take longer, but I'm actually just doing something in the background. And so as you can see, that took a while. So sorry, I said that wrong. That didn't take too long. But that's only because I'm rendering it at 12 samples. So now if you want to actually try to improve that a bit, what you have to actually do is go into the Compositor and actually do the denoising there, because trying to do it afterwards in a separate program to denoise the frames, of course, is pointless, because any program you use afterwards will not have the information used to build the scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Compositor, and so now we have our scene. So I'm just going to do Shift Spacebar just so I can get a just to do a full screen view. So here we have the so this is our image, and then we have obviously the viewer and the composite output. Now, in order to denoise this properly, the default settings that we have, where in the render layers is only the image, alpha, and the Z. Those 3 basically aren't enough to actually do any work with the render. So what you have to actually do is you need to go into the render layers. So if you go into the the panel which is usually on the right, and you probably usually starts off in render. So if you go to the next one, which is render layers, and you go down, you'll notice that in the passes, the only one that's ticked is combiner Z, and then when you look over in the compositor, they're the only ones which appear under image. But in order to do a proper denoise, what we have to do is actually turn on more passes. But what you'll find, you'll find that you can work all this out if you look at a tutorial on the compositor. But basically, in my scene, what you normally do is turn everything on and then go into the compositor and see which ones give an output. So in my scene, the only things that actually gave an output are diffuse and the glossy. So when I checked, I had no transmission and no subsurface, so there's no point in me putting them on. And I don't know if they're of any use, but the denoiser that I'm using uses the normal and the ambient occlusion as well. Although I have to admit, I don't think well, anyway. And so what you'll notice is that the as we turned on these extra settings in the passes, then the outputs actually appeared in the render layers sort of node. The only thing you'll find is that if we connect up the image, you'll see that you can see this scene that was rendered. I'm just going to use shift space bar again. Yeah, so you can see the scene that had rendered before. And but if we go to, say, the diffuse color and connect that up, then you get nothing. The reason why is because you have to actually re-render it. So basically, if I do F12 to re-render the scene, because what happens is when you're working in the compositor, it will only use information from your last render. And if you haven't, and basically the render uses the settings in that render layers panel in order to determine which parts of the scene to separate out or into render layers effectively. So if you find that any of those outputs are black, especially the color ones, if they're dark when they shouldn't be, then that means you just have to re-render the scene. And I mean, at the moment, I've got something going in the background, so it's taking a bit longer than usual. But this frame each frame normally takes about 50 seconds to render, which is still quite long. But it's because I'm using the way I'm using the lighting, and the fact it's inside, which doesn't help. Okay, so that's finished. Right, so now, yeah, as you can see now, the diffuse color has appeared. So what we, so basically, what we have to do now is to connect these through the denoiser into our output. So to get that up, what we have to do is actually I might as well show you how I actually did it. Let's see. Right, what you have to do is there's a the denoiser node comes in a sort of node pack. And what you basically have to do is inside that node pack, there is a blend file, and you have to go in there and then append it. So I'll just quickly show you how to do that, just to save you having to look it up somewhere else. If you go to append, and as you can see, well, I've already did it. So I'm just gonna go back. Right, so what you do is wherever you've downloaded the file, because what I'll do is I'll give you a link to it in the description. But basically, once you've downloaded the file somewhere, you then have to go to wherever it is, and basically, yeah, here it is. So it's it's called the B-Wide Node Pack. And if you find where the blend is, then go into it. Then you have to go into the node tree. And once you're into the directory with the node trees, you have to look for one which is called, that's right, it's the pass combined denoiser. So if you click on that and do append from library, but I already have it in anyway, but hopefully I haven't messed up my system. So what you do is when you're in the node, when you're in the compositor, you then do Shift A, and then if you go to group, yeah, you see the second one's appeared because obviously I've got it in already, and it's select the pass combined denoiser, and then that will appear. And basically, even though it looks a bit, well, it's got quite a few inputs, but it's actually quite straightforward to use. So what you have to do is to just connect the image up to the image. And then if you do the image to the output, you get nothing. And so then what I do is just connect each one up. And then what you'll find is when you connect the direct and the indirect, you won't get anything, but it's only when you connect the color, because the color is the last one they're combined with. Oh, actually I just made I was wondering why. Yeah, I'm just a bit short-sighted, that's all, so I wasn't looking properly. And there you go, so for some reason my backdrop has stopped working, I'm not sure why that. Anyway, so for some reason my backdrop has stopped working, because normally it should appear behind there. But once you connect everything up, as you can see, the rendered image instantly looks a lot smoother. And so to show the difference, just do another render again. And so as it's rendering, you can see the noise, the way that it appears. And then you see all that noise, and then suddenly, bam, there it goes. You can see the way it went a little bit more blurry. But even though you do lose a bit of the detail and it does blur the scene slightly more, at least you don't have to have all that noise everywhere. And the important thing is that because this is an animation, that's the main thing that matters. You wouldn't use this kind of a method if you're doing a still. If it was a still, then of course you'd render it with your 1,000 samples and be done with it. But when you've got 1,000 frames to render or more, then of course this is the kind of method you really need to use in order, well, it's either this or get yourself a more expensive machine or use a render farm. So if you can get away with just using this node pack and save all the extra cash, then I'd say it's worth it, just so you can see the scene rendered, or you know, finally have your scene sort of finished rendering. Okay, I'll leave a link to where you can get the node pack from, and basically which has this denoiser in it. And if you have any, if you manage to do anything with it, then you can just leave a comment or even show where you've leave a link to your video, etc. Okay, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Okay, bye.